Yes, geezers, what's going on? It's Spessy here, and by popular demand, I'm bringing you my own version of a meta report. This is a quick, comprehensive, maybe not, meta report where I've just really highlighted the most important decks that I'm seeing on the ladder a lot. You might notice there's no monsters. I didn't include it. I'm just not playing against much monsters. Kel Tullis would probably be the top pick, but hopefully we can see some monster decks at the top 16 qualifier that's happening this weekend. I'm going to be casting that on the Sunday on my Twitch channel if you're interested. Late afternoon is when that's going to be going down. I'm going to be posting some videos as well about the most interesting deck lists from that, so make sure you look out for that. That's when we really get a really good idea of where the meta settles. But this is my first attempt at it. Let's have a gander. I've got 4 tiers. I've got tier 3 all the way up to tier 0. I've got 2 decks for tier 3. The first one is the Sigfold deck that I posted because I think it's actually pretty decent. If I was playing in a tournament, I would certainly be playing it. This is the final version I settled on. If you want to see the full video for this deck, feel free to do so. I'm not going to talk about each one too long, but the idea is you get your Sigfold up to about 100 points, and if your opponent doesn't play Heatwave, then you kind of just win in a lot of situations. It's very easy to win round 1 by using cards like Get Enough. And then the new Sigfold card, you just pile on lots of Mardromes. You have a Defender which you can res as well. So if your opponent doesn't play Purify Heatwave, if they don't play Invo Heatwave, they often need to have 2 cards. If they lock your Sigfold, you've got Aeons to unlock it. It's a really fun deck. A lot of you would have already seen that. So that's the first one in tier 3. The other one I put in was a Milva Guerrilla Tactics deck. Very, very similar to the TLG meta report one from last season. The key difference being I removed Madoc and put Muzzle in place. Madoc is just one card that can brick. There's already a million of those, and Muzzle is just a card that does fit the theme of this deck very well. Milva, of course, just very awkward to use since she changed, but still the best leader ability by quite a distance in my opinion, because you really want to play the Saskia. The other thing to note is Saskia is really weak to Siege decks, but Alumni has been creeping back into the meta over Siege anyway. Siege decks often playing double Boiling Oil and they can purify your Saskia. You also might want to consider playing something like a TA instead of the Curse Scroll. But, mate, you brick so much, you really need that Saskia round 1, so I went for the Curse Scroll in this one. Also might want to fiddle with the 4 provision cards. At the moment, the only option you have for Simless is with your Orbs and with your Bombs. I did put in a second pact, but you might want to play... I only play in 1 pact, you might want to try playing 2 packs, maybe remove the Making a Bomb, maybe remove the Spores. You could, of course, buy Heatwave in this deck as well, but I think Muzzle is a better pick. It's also a spell card for Yowza. Alright, that's the Scoia'tael deck of choice. Moving on then to really the meat and potatoes where we're in at tier 2. There's a couple of decks in at tier 2. Let's start off with the one that was very close to making tier 1, and this is Siege. I do think you can make a strong argument for this being in tier 1. The reason I've placed it in tier 2 though is because there is a Northern Realms deck which is just considerably better than this one. Siege, of course, getting a whole bunch of buffs, notably the Siege Masters in at 4 provisions, as well as the change to the resupply. Basically every card working in a similar way to Reinforced Ballista means cards like Boiling Oil, cards like Reinforcements, Bombardment and Winches are just quite incredible. You also have the thinning of Hensel, Hubert, as well as the Siege Masters, which means the deck thins down to nearly 0. Really strong deck, but again, Alumni seemingly better, which we're going to get onto a little bit later. The other tier 2 deck, I do think this list could still be refined. It's a deck that I played on patch day, but this is actually the version that Spyro was playing. This is the most popular one that I've seen on ladder. I don't think it's perfectly refined, but it's combining Self-Wound with a lot of the newly buffed cards such as Nut and Sigfold, as well as the Restore card is in here as well. Working in a very similar way to Self-Wound decks that we've had for the past couple of months. But yeah, this Nut card is just absolutely insane if you can get the Berserk on this card. Continually using the Berserk 5 on this, particularly if you can use this on Sigfold. Again, this is Spiro's deck. I would say that this deck probably wants to play some more 4s. I think Mardromes in particular are really, really good cards on Sigfold. This is definitely a deck that I'm going to be revisiting myself in the coming days, so make sure you look out for that. But it's a deck that's really good into Siege decks with cards like Sigfold and Veteran, really good into random damage, as well as having like some... Well, it doesn't have much control, but it just has a bunch of engines, so you can often outpoint other decks into long rounds. So yeah, really, really nice option for SK. The other tier 2 deck, well, we already talked about that, was Siege. So tier 1. Again, both these decks you could make a case for being, tier 1, but I do think they're the weaker options for their faction. There's some better options. Starting with let's go for Syndicate first. This is just the same Syndicate deck that you would have been seeing last season. The only difference is from the one that was on the TLG meta report is I downgraded an eavesdrop to a 4 provision card, and that's because Jackpot lost 1 provision. There are quite a lot of different Syndicate decks doing the rounds. Again, this is something that I think is more just worth looking at this weekend when it's going to be the top 16 qualifier, the best 16 players from last season. Having a look at what Syndicate decks they're playing is going to be giving us a much better idea of the exact sort of version of Syndicate that's going to be optimal this season. It's quite a control heavy list with Horson, Philippa, Professor, Freak Show, Kurt. You got the Salamander Mages in there, a single Sea Jackal as well. Obviously, you're playing Jackpot, you don't need it too much, but you can overprofit with things like Fistex. Yeah. That's basically it. It's the same deck that we've been playing for a very long time. I've seen a few people experimental with off the books and stuff like that. I would expect this to still be the best version. But also the buff to muzzle is quite a big deal for this deck because Freak Show at 6 points with 1 armor was much more difficult to remove, whereas now muzzle is a very popular card that deals with cards like Letitia as well, so you do see that in a lot of decks. So I definitely think this deck is worse than it was last season, but it's still just right up there. The other deck, one of the other decks in Tier 1, which won't surprise you at all, is Nilfgaard Double Cross. Now, again, this weekend, I would not be surprised to see quite a few people playing Imprisonment Nilfgaard. It's going to be worse into the mirror if you play Imprisonment, but it's certainly going to be better into Alumni, which is one of the best decks right now, as we're soon to see. Again, this is just a straight copy and paste from last season's TLG meta report. Nothing has really changed in Nilfgaard apart from the inclusion. Potentially you might want to consider is this Van Morlahan Servant, but that's going to be more a card you're going to be looking at playing in Imprisonment because you can combine the Leader Charge plus the Servant then to give you essentially a 5-point lock. So definitely look out for those Imprisonment decks. I didn't want to build it myself again because it's a new deck to me, and if I was to share that list with you, it wouldn't be optimal, and we're only a couple days away from the top 16. Again, just be looking out for that video that I post on the most interesting decks from the top 16. Finally, one I'm really happy to see right up in Tier 1 is a deck that I'm going to take a lot of credit for. This is a non-devotion Skellige Pirates deck. As you guys will know, I was playing a whole bunch of this. I have actually been for a couple of months, and lots of pro players in the last couple weeks of the last patch. We're playing a deck very similar to what I had. The key difference was I was playing Heatwave. A lot of them removed the Heatwave. Apparently Heatwave is just not all that good. I was thinking, well, it's great into Alumni, but I guess if you're Heatwaving a Letitia, you're trading down. Muzzle, though, is just a fantastic option for this deck now because it's points. I think I was like going too heavy on in control. The other thing that these guys were playing a whole bunch of is the on-crate longships. Unfortunately, that does mean that I had to lose the Fisher King. I was 1 provision short, and I did put Maxi in place. I do think Fisher King is a fantastic option in this deck, though. I really do like it a lot, but Maxi is sort of doing a similar thing for just a provision less. The longships just give you an extra target for your crack on crate, and obviously they're developing a lot of armor as well as setting up your Junod and giving you armor on things like your Terror of the Seas. The other card that I include 2 of is just the Primal Savagery. A lot of the professional players were including cards such as Invader to give you some more proactivity. It's also got a pirate tag, so that's something you might want to consider if you're struggling for a little bit of proactivity. But other than that, it's basically the exact same deck that I was playing last season. Again, Muzzle coming in instead of Heatwave, and these on-crate longships just coming in instead of pretty much instead of Fisher King, as well as like a couple tweaks here and there. But really happy to see this deck doing so well. Fantastic leader ability. Again, I would love to get Fisher King in there. But here it is, the top deck. Now, confession, I don't know if I've built this particularly optimally. I haven't played any Alumni. It's not a deck I enjoy playing, but this was my take on Alumni. Basically, I didn't really want to play these cards, and so I'm going to actually remove those. Here's the shell of the deck, which I think in an ideal world you'd want to play. It's the exact same, except there's a key difference, and that's that the Siege Master is now an insanely strong card as just a mid-range ability, comparable to a Mage Assassin, comparable to a Skirmisher. It's actually 2 points less than both of those cards, but that just shows you how good Mage Assassin and Skirmisher are, that this card is still seeing play. I've also got the Carrick Marines in here as well, because there's no real reason to go non-devotion unless you want to... There's a few reasons you might, which I think we might see this weekend, but again, I would rather just wait. There's not that many reasons to go non-devotion, really, because you can thin so much with cards like Vengeance and now the Siege Masters. You could go down the Marshy Truffle route. I've always preferred the non-devotion with the Marines. They're good options off Shani, good options off casting contests, which, by the way, I don't have any casting contests in the deck. The key difference is you need to include those siege engines. The Siege Ladder is a fantastic option when you're playing Letitia, because your Letitia gets moved to the front row, and then you can just use Assault to pull the Siege Ladder, and then move your Letitia to the back row, and instantly clicking your Letitia. It's a really, really nice option to have. This is something I saw Paya do. So you want to play some more siege engines, because at the moment we only have the Siege Ladder and the Vengeance, and we don't want to end up with these bricked in our hands. So what are the other options you have? Well, you could include stuff like Siege Towers, you can include stuff like Battering Rams, Reinforced Trebuchets, Caraballistas, you could include Frigate, which I think is a great card, you can include Foltest Pride, which doesn't feel great because you don't have many soldiers. I was thinking you could maybe just go War Chariot and Hensel. And I know this is going to be a little bit controversial, but what Hensel does is it just gives you access to this Vengeance more often. And Vengeance in round 1 is a fantastic tool for this deck, because it allows you to develop your engines like your Bannard students while also threatening to win on even. The other thing with Hensel is it just synergizes incredibly well with the Winch. And what I really didn't want to do was remove any of these 4 provision cards, because they just look all incredibly strong. And I was thinking about playing Foltest Pride, but I just didn't have the provisions for it. And while War Chariot is quite a lackluster card, what it does give you is it does give you some form of Purify, not a Purify per se, but an offensive Purify in a Devotion deck, because you can move your opponent's Defender, and then you're able to Selkirk or use your Bannard student damage, your alumni damage, and other things. So while War Chariot is a very expensive card, it is a Winch option. It does have a cooldown, of course, for Hensel. I decided it's not that bad. It's certainly not great, but this is the one I went for. You might also want to consider playing Adalia, Bloody Baron, and of course you might just decide to ditch the Carrick Marines and go non-devotion, because there's so many good 4 provision cards. There's no way on earth I ever wanted to kick things like Winches, and this is the only real way I could get enough siege engines in while also still playing all these incredibly strong 4 provision cards. Yeah, that's my scuffed meta report, if you like to coin what Freddy Babes used to call them. Again, the other sort of notable mentions is some sort of Keltalis deck, I think, is a consideration. Imprisonment Nilfgaard is definitely something to keep your eyes on. I think there's lots of other Syndicate decks, more bounty-heavy lists. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Maybe some Geddy decks, maybe some Flurry decks, but these are the ones that I really wanted to draw your attentions to. These are going to be the most important ones. And again, make sure you look out for that video from the top 16 most interesting decks. And I am going to be casting that event on Sunday on my Twitch channel if you're interested in coming to watch me cast some games of Gwent. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to see me do these every month, do let me know. And yeah, thanks for watching the whole thing. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my positioning of all these? Is Alumni the best deck? Do you agree with Tier 1 for Pirates, Tier 1 for Double Cross and Jackpot? Do you agree with Tier 2 for Siege, or do you think it should be in Tier 1? What about Ursine? And finally, what other decks do you think deserve to make it to this tier list that I didn't include? Thanks so much for watching. See you on the next video. Deuces.